Hi guys, Jay Knowlton here once again, and I'm going to start with an apology because I am making another video about the changes to the permanent residency visa in Japan, because today, this is all fresh, the 4th of August 2026, the immigration services have announced their draft proposal for the guidelines about permanent residency. So it's not official. Of course, none of this is official. It's all been like speculation, but obviously from good sources. And the kind of revision is the details of this is I've only found it in Japanese. It's going to be translated into English and put out soon, but it's from the Mainichi Shimbun, everyday newspaper, I guess, if it was in English. So they've announced basically there are three key factors which are part of their revisions to the proposal. Of course, they don't actually go into any details about, for example, salary, because that's all been speculation so far. Like, even if we say, like, the average national household's income, it's actually not been officially announced anywhere. But there's three areas, and I'm going to be just translating parts of this into English as best English as I can, as best of English as I can. So number one is good conduct. So I imagine just being a good person, behaving, following the rules, not breaking the law. Number two, assets or skills sufficient to maintain an independent livelihood. Now it says or, but I'm sure it means and. And then three is that the permanent residence serves Japan's interests, which is a very interesting one. Of course, there's no concrete details, so we can only speculate what that means. But the article does go into some specifics, especially about the independent livelihood requirement. So while the guidelines state that it's a stable life can be expected for the future, and of course we've been talking about the pension. In one of our videos, I kind of said about how I believe part of this is to ensure that they can support themselves in retirement. They don't need to rely on being a net drain on the state. So that they expect, so the draft revision, and this is what it says, they require an economic situation equivalent to or better than those of Japanese people. And authorities will have, the income will consistently exceed the average for a Japanese household, and then again about the 30 years of pension enrollment, so having the equivalent of that. So it says specifically here that they want people to have equivalent or exceeding what a Japanese household would make, which is obviously very difficult, as we talked about. And then to the national interest requirement, which is quite interesting because I think, was it my previous video or the video before, I mentioned about, I wonder if it would be in a good interest of Japan if they considered the jobs that people were doing, and whether they benefited Japan. So this applicant, and then I said about like with volunteering and stuff, that could be cool if that was a point. Maybe they listen to me, because it says the applicant must actively and concretely bring benefits to Japan. And then negative assessments will be made, such as failure to properly pay taxes and health insurance. And then there was a thing also released that said, like, to lose your permanent residency, there's also the case of not paying your health insurance, but that doesn't necessarily cancel it. What would cancel it is that if you didn't pay and then actively didn't try to remedy not paying it, if that makes sense. So if you missed a payment, okay, fine. But if you're actively not trying to pay it in the future, okay, goodbye. And then past convictions involving imprisonment or fines. And now the fines one is interesting because you can get fined for driving violations. You can get fined for littering, smoking on the street, Be very, very careful about what you're doing outside because we don't have any details, but we wouldn't want you to mess up. Yesterday, when I went to Tokyo, there was just two young foreigners just smoking in the street. Now, of course, Japanese people also smoke on the street, and it's bad. It's illegal. Nobody should do it. But of course, you can't just say, "But Japanese people do it too." Like, why aren't you? It affects your visa. That's why you shouldn't do it. Don't think about what Japanese people do or don't do. Think about what you're doing. And then a lack of understanding of Japanese systems and rules. I wonder what that means in particular because we've seen the things where, and even Japanese media has caught onto this. And I remember a lot of the people who were getting up in arms about the permanent resident things. They used to put on Twitter like, if the NHK guy comes, you can say Nihongo tabemasen or something like that. The Gaijin smash, as it used to be called. And then factors such as possessing a certain level of Japanese language proficiency and ensuring their children attend compulsory education. Now, this might seem weird for some people. Like, of course, people who have kids send their kids to school. You are probably going to. This is a story that I might go into a different day. I got this weird connection one time where there was an English school, like an Eikaiwa, that was opened near my international school when I used to work there. So I just reached out to them to say, like, do you need any help with advertising? Do you need any help with getting students? Please let me know. And I didn't know anything about the teacher. I just wanted to reach out. And I went there, and it was three people from Sri Lanka. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, you can speak English very well. One of them could speak English very well. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Like, the school was very, very, the building they chose was horrible. And I've seen their Instagram and I don't think they've got any kids. But one of the people that was there owned a international school in Tokyo. And this was weird because he told me that they make zero money, but the school just relies on just they have like they said they like have 100 shareholders. So basically just people are throwing their money into this school. And it was an international school, but it cost about 20,000 yen a month. And they said they had no Japanese lessons and they just only had they had like 20 teachers from Sri Lanka. All the kids were from Sri Lanka, and it was very, very odd. Like, they were making no money. They were, it was to be honest, I found it quite, strange. But there are probably a lot of families in Japan who don't send their kids to school. Actually, one of my students online was a Chinese kid, and he was living in Japan and didn't attend school. He would go to like a soccer academy, a football academy, but he wasn't going to regular Japanese school. He's gone back to China now because they didn't renew their family's visa. But there is something in there that would cause that to happen. And then, so the permanent residency for 10 years or more if they meet the requirements. And then the spouses, there is actually going to be a change to spousal permanent residency, which means that instead of the 3 years of marriage, that will be increased to 5 years. And I'm sure the thing about that is to disencourage scam marriages, because of course getting a scam marriage for a visa, all well and good. 5 years is a long time to fake a marriage. If you're 30 years old and you fake a marriage for 5 years, I mean, that's 5 years of your life that you've lost. And it might be difficult to find your other real marriage in that time. Well, you might have one, but just it would be weird if you got divorced and then married somebody else again. So I'm sure that would raise some flags. So yeah, that's another one. And then, so they have also released guidelines that would remove permanent residency, which includes failure to pay taxes or public health insurance premiums, or as well as sentencing to imprisonment for offenses such as theft, fraud, extortion, or murder. Now, we have seen in the past year there are a lot of cases of foreigners. I don't want to sound rude, particularly from Vietnam, with a lot of crimes. There's been stories of not just them doing crimes on Japanese people, but killing each other, robbing houses, theft, shoplifting, stealing copper from train tracks. Of course, it's not only them, but it is something that I would be concerned about. So those are the new guidelines. I'm going to leave the article. Of course, by the time a few days has passed, there's going to be a lot of English articles about this as well. I should make my own newspaper, which you can't just directly translate news, but I'm sure I could. How can I say, rights? I could go onto the immigration website myself, look at the guidelines and write my own article, but I'm too lazy for that. But yeah, guys, have a look at the article yourself if you want to, if you can read Japanese. Let me know what you think now that the revised guidelines have been released. It basically follows what we've known up until now, but I think the actively contributes to benefit Japan society is a very interesting one as well. I wonder what's the kind of komakai, the more detailed parts of that would be. Anyway, as always, thanks all for watching, guys. You're really helping this channel grow. Thanks you so much always, and I'll see you all next time.